Hey guys, so I read the book Teach Like a Champion by Doug Lemov, and this book was about 49 different techniques that can make a teacher great. Not good, but great. Um, and one of the things that Doug Lemov says is that great teaching can be learned. So you may not be a great teacher right now, but it's definitely something that you can get to. Um, so this book just goes through the best techniques to become a great teacher. So I'm going to just go through some of the techniques, not all of the techniques, but some of the techniques that I think are either really, really great techniques that I've seen in teachers that I really thought stood out, or things that I think that I'm going to struggle with. So in chapter one is setting high academic expectations, and there's 5 different techniques in that chapter. So the one that I think that I will struggle with the most is technique 2, which is right is right. And it talks about how a teacher doesn't need to tell a student that their answer is correct unless it's fully correct. And I feel like teachers have a really hard time with that, and they tend to say, oh yeah, that's right, but also blah, blah, blah. And it says that if they don't get the answer fully correct, then it's not right. And a way that you can go about that is if they give you partially the correct answer, to say, okay, but what else? Or can you tell me a little bit more about that? The next one in that section that I really thought was good was that format matters. That's something that I feel like teachers really struggle with, is to teach students the correct format so that we're prepared for college whenever we get here. And it talks about how teachers should require students to answer in complete sentences 100% of the time. Chapter 2 is planning that ensures academic achievement. So technique 6 is begin with the end, which we talked a lot about in our class, and it's just starting with your end product or your unit and planning backwards, or backwards planning, as Dr. Price likes to call it. And I just thought that that was something to point out since we have talked about that in class. Technique 10 is to double plan, which I'd never heard this before. And it talked about not only planning what you as a teacher are doing, but don't forget to plan what the student will be doing. That way, if a student gets done quickly, or if a student hits a roadblock, you'll know exactly what you need to do to fix that. So you're supposed to anticipate struggles that the student has ahead of time and plan for that. Chapter 3 is structuring and delivering your lessons. And this talked about the I, we, and you techniques. So in I techniques, I chose technique number 13, which is to name the steps. It talks about if you have a complex skill, break it down into smaller ones and give those small steps names so that your students can remember them later on. I feel like that's kind of like learning songs for mathematical equations. If you have something that triggers your memory, you'll be able to remember it better. In we techniques, I chose technique 16, which is to break it down. So if students don't understand, you're supposed to break it down, and you're supposed to provide an example, provide context, provide the missing or first step if they're struggling, and they're struggling at the beginning, maybe give them that first step and then see where they go. Or if they're in the middle and they're just stuck, then give them that next step to help them to move on. In the U techniques, I chose technique 20, which is the exit ticket, which I really loved when I was in school. And it's just to try to gather whether your student is actually understanding what you talked about during the day and if they're really grasping it. And then I have chapter 5 is creating a strong classroom culture. So a strong classroom culture, that they define it as a place where students work hard, behave, model strong character, and do their best. So there are 5 different aspects of classroom culture, which are discipline, management, control, influence, and engagement. And one of my articles that I read was about engaging students in learning activities. It talked about the golden rules for engaging students. So my article talked about 6 different ways to engage your students, and they said to make it meaningful. So make the activity something that the students are going to want to do, or make it to where they see the meaning in it. They see the why. So provide autonomy. Foster a sense of competence. Establish positive teacher-student relationships, which I think is so important. We talked about that a lot in class. And promote mastery orientations. And that's just like students pursue an activity because they want to learn it, not because they're forced to, or not because they think it'll make their mom happy, but because they actually want to learn about it. So then I have, back to the book, is Technique 28, and it's an entry routine. And this is still on creating a strong classroom culture. Is an entry routine, which we've talked a lot about in principals, is they need to have the same routine every single day when they're coming into the classroom. They need to know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. If you have a opener, or if you have an opening activity that needs to already be on the board, they don't need to be trying to get things up, picking things up from you. Those should be laid out and ready for them, and they should be the same every single day. Technique 31, which is something that I really loved when I was in school, is binder control. And this was where they, you have a table of contents for them, or they create a table of contents whenever they go through. And whenever you give them something, then they write it in the table of contents and they put it in their folder. And this makes it easy for students to organize, and it makes it easy whenever you're trying to help your students study for exams, to say, okay, study, make sure that you're remembering to look over numbers 8 through 10 in your binder. So I loved that technique when I was in school, and I think that I will definitely use that. Chapter 6 was setting and maintaining high behavioral expectations. And the technique that I chose for that was to use a strong voice, and that's technique 38. And that's something that I think that I will struggle with a lot when I'm teaching. But it talks about, to establish control, you have to have a strong voice. Don't talk over students. If they're talking and they're not listening to you, just stop. Sometimes it's better to just stop and wait for them to stop talking than to try to talk over them. Don't engage. So it gave an example of if one student has their feet on someone else's desk and you say, hey, get your feet off their desk. And he says, well, they were touching me. You don't say, okay, well, why are you touching them? No, you say, I told you to get your feet off their desk. So don't engage in whatever they're trying to pull you into. And then it talks about quiet power. So it doesn't, whenever they're talking, and if you're not wanting to just stop talking completely, don't raise your voice. Don't try to be louder than they are. Just get very quiet. Slow your talking. And it will make them want to stop and listen. So technique 42 is no warnings. If you give students warnings, they are going to say, okay, well, it's okay if I do this sometimes because I just got a warning. So it says do not use warnings. Just automatically go straight to their consequence. They know the rules. There's no reason for them to be doing the things that they're doing, and so you just go straight to the consequence. And this goes with one of my articles, and that is Effective Teaching Strategies, 6 Keys to Classroom Excellence. And there are 6 different keys to the excellence, obviously, 6 keys to classroom excellence. Number 1 is interest and explanation. So make sure it's something they're interested in, and if at all possible, explain why they're doing what they're doing. Concern and respect for students and their learning. So let them know that you care. Appropriate assessment and feedback. Clear goals and an intellectual challenge. So make sure that you're making the assignments challenging for them and not so challenging that it's disappointing whenever they're not getting it. Independence, control, and active engagement, and learning from students. You know, we have stuff to learn from students all the time, so learning from students. And then my third article is actually about teacher behavioral strategies, which I missed including in the middle of my little talk here, but I'll go into it now. So it's Teacher Behavioral Strategies, a menu. And I focus mostly on talking about the prior to occurrence of a behavior. So before behavior actually even occurs, you should, I think this is more like to avoid from behavioral issues. Break students' tasks into manageable chunks so they're not throwing temper tantrums whenever they're not getting it done or they're not understanding. Increase adult supervision if that's possible. Increase reinforcement quality of classroom, so reward them for doing good. Offer different choices so they're not freaking out thinking you're telling them what to do. We talked a lot about middle schoolers really like to have choice. Offer help strategies. Preview rules and behavioral expectations. That's something that you do at the beginning. Again, like in my article, in my book, it talks about you don't give warnings. So that's not a time to give warnings. That's something you do at the beginning. Preview your schedule. Like Dr. Price has the schedule printed out or wrote on the board for us every single day. Provide skill instructions. Rearrange student seating or classroom setup if there's behavioral issues with certain students. Move them. Give them a chance to move themselves, and if they don't, move them. And then teach students to take calm down breaks. I had a teacher in high school. Not in high school, but in elementary school. There was a student who had ADHD very, very badly. And he couldn't focus, and he would just jitter in his seat the entire time. And so my teacher, this was in 4th grade, and my teacher decided that she was going to sit him at the back of the classroom, and whenever he needed to move or whenever he needed to get out his jitters and his ADHD started kicking in, then he could stand up and take his notes standing up, because that helped him release that energy, and it just gave him a chance to calm down and get focused back on what he was doing while still getting his work done. So I really enjoyed this book. I think that these strategies are definitely something to strive to hit all of them. You know, we all want to be great teachers. But this book is definitely something that everyone should read. And I just thought it was really awesome. Thank you.